My name is Leslie Kozerski, and I am presenting this PowerPoint on celiac disease. I chose this topic because my father was recently diagnosed with celiac disease after being hospitalized for malabsorption and a subsequent stroke. And since his release, he requires round-the-clock care. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to research exactly how and why that happened. Okay, what is celiac disease? Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that damages the villi of the small intestine and interferes with the absorption of nutrients from food. Let's break that down a little. What does autoimmune mean? In this illustration, you can see just a brief depiction of a normal immune response versus an autoimmune response. The immune system, which is supposed to protect us from the outside world, is actually mistaking some part of the body as a pathogen and attacking the healthy tissue. Under normal conditions, the immune system is designed to protect us from invaders called antigens, things such as toxins, bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, etc. And when these antigens come in contact with our body, the immune system is equipped to attack the outsiders to defend our body's home territory. But in people with an autoimmune disease, the immune system gets confused about what's an antigen and what's its own healthy body tissue. So it recognizes it as a threat and subsequently destroys it. So when people with celiac disease eat foods that contain gluten, their immune system is uniquely programmed to recognize it as a threat and react by damaging the tissue lining of the small intestine called the villi. The immune system thinks it's doing a good job keeping us safe, but ultimately it's destroying our healthy gut lining. During normal operation, the tiny villi are responsible for absorbing nutrients from our food, but over time, these long finger-like structures get destroyed to the point of flattened out stubs. Here is an example of what the villi look like in the different stages of destruction. Example A is what villi look like in a normal, healthy person. In example B, you notice that the villi begin to lose their shape, which affects the process of absorbing nutrients. And by the third example, you can see that the villi are completely flat and unable to maintain any function. So how does this happen? Well, the gut plays a critical role in protecting our body from the outside environment. It's literally functioning similar to our skin, but on the inside of our body. This is an illustration of the normal nutrient absorption process. You can see that as food breaks down through digestion, the villi absorb the good nutrients through the cells and protect us from undigested food and toxins from getting inside. It's kind of like how our skin takes in ultraviolet light from the sun, but still protects us from the outside environment. So many people know that people with celiac disease can't have gluten, but most don't know why. Virtually all cereal grains contain toxic prolamins, and prolamins are proteins that are extremely tough for humans to digest. The human gut is just not equipped to break down prolamins small enough to absorb any nutrients from them. This slide shows some examples of a few different prolamins. Wheat contains the protein gluten, which harbors one of the worst prolamin offenders called gliadin. Many different parts of gluten are problematic, but gliadin has the most powerful toxic effect on the intestinal barrier and severely damages the gut lining, even in healthy people. These toxic effects are exponentially worse for people who have the genetics for gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. Gliadin not only causes inflammation of the intestine, but it also finds a way to get past our body's natural defenses. So how does celiac cause an autoimmune disorder? Well, we should consider at this point that people with celiac disease have an ongoing war going on inside their intestine. Our gut is lined with cells designed to let the good guys in and keep the bad guys out. In celiac disease, a major breakdown happens in this defense system when gliadin starts tricking its way through the wall. Now, this is where things get tricky. And I recently realized that the process of how gluten causes the body to become autoimmune is pretty intricate, and there are a lot of paracellular processes that are involved. So I'm going to essentially dumb down the process into terms that I feel that I can easily and effectively explain. So think of your gut lining like a mesh wall with special doors to walk through if you have this secret code. The good nutrients and other smaller particles can slip right through the mesh wall without a problem, but larger undigested proteins like gliadin can't get through the wall at all. The doors along the mesh wall are called tight junctions, and they're the gateway between the gut cells. Tight junctions are controlled by an intricate process of signals, and researchers have identified a protein called zonulin. And zonulin is one of those delicate signals that control the opening and closing of the tight junctions. So tight junctions are essentially our barrier between the good guys and the bad guys in regards to digestion. Now, gliadin is programmed with a special secret code that causes zonulin levels to increase in people who have a genetic predisposition to celiac disease. But as the zonulin levels go up, the tight junctions begin to function abnormally. They begin to open up wider and wider, which loosens the protective barrier of the gut wall. And with these gaps in protection, the gut lining starts to allow large particles into the body that aren't supposed to be there. So gliadin can sneak its way right through and build up behind the intestinal wall. And we need to remember that gliadin is toxic. The more severely those cells are damaged, the worse the intestinal permeability gets, and soon you're left with full-blown leaky gut syndrome. And leaky gut syndrome is what causes the body to become autoimmune. So you can see how that process works in the image on the slide here, where the tight junctions are opening up and letting in fragments that aren't supposed to be there. And the immune system's response is to create antibodies to attack antigens caused by the leaky gut syndrome. But mistakenly, it also attacks the gut's normal cells, known as enterocytes. And since antibodies can recognize and remember specific pathogens, they are able to mount stronger attacks each time they encounter them. And over time, these attacks get bad enough that they completely destroy the microvilli and of the intestinal lining, as I showed you in the previous slide. So in review, if a person with celiac disease ingests gluten, it causes the tight junctions to fail, which allows pathogens through the lining and creates leaky gut syndrome, resulting in an autoimmune response by the body. All right, so now that we understand how celiac disease is caused and what it means for the body, we need to know what the symptoms are, how it's diagnosed, and what long-term effects the body will have if it goes untreated. Currently, there are over 300 symptoms of celiac disease, and it's often undiagnosed or misdiagnosed due to the vagueness of the symptoms. Some common symptoms include abdominal bloating and pain, chronic diarrhea, vomiting, constipation, weight loss, and fatigue. Some common symptoms that are more often seen in children are irritability and behavioral problems, delayed growth in puberty, defects out of permanent teeth, and ADHD. Now, it's true that some people may not present with any symptoms at all, but all people with celiac disease are at risk for long-term health complications. How is celiac disease diagnosed? The first step is through a blood test that looks for specific antibodies. If the result of the blood test suggests celiacs, the physician will likely recommend a biopsy of the small intestine, which is the only definitive diagnostic test available. How is celiac disease treated? Well, there's no medication available that can treat celiac disease. However, due to the malabsorption of nutrients, physicians will likely recommend the use of certain vitamins such as vitamin D, B complex, or calcium. Now, the only treatment that is known to treat celiac disease is a lifelong commitment to a 100% gluten-free diet. This is a diet free of all wheat, rye, and barley. Well, what happens if celiac disease is left untreated? Left untreated, celiac is likely to lead to many long-term life-threatening health conditions, which include early onset of osteoporosis or osteopenia, central and peripheral nervous system disease, pancreatic disease, internal hemorrhaging, vitamin deficiency causing possibly severe or fatal malabsorption, which is what happened to my father and is what caused him to be diagnosed. Neurological manifestations include seizures, dementia, migraines, neuropathy. It has also been linked to certain types of cancer, especially intestinal lymphoma. So what should you do if you think you have celiac disease? Well, the first step is to make an appointment with your primary care physician. But it's important not to change your diet prior to seeing your physician, because if you start on a gluten-free diet before you're definitively diagnosed, you already begin to repair the intestinal wall, and that may lead to a misdiagnosis. And speaking of misdiagnosis, going gluten-free seems to be a big thing these days. Oprah's just giving away gluten allergies because gluten-free diets have exploded in the last year or two. So I wanted just to quickly touch base on the differences between legitimate celiac disease and other similar gluten sensitivity issues. The term gluten intolerance refers to the entire category of gluten issues. That includes celiac disease, gluten sensitivity, and wheat allergies. Now, you can see here that this is what is called the celiac iceberg. There's many variations of this, but what you see is that it shows that most gluten intolerances are not actually celiac disease. So when people say they have celiac disease because bread gives them diarrhea, it's often misunderstood and most likely a gluten sensitivity issue. I'll briefly explain what the differences are between the three types of gluten intolerances. We already learned that celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that affects the digestive process of the small intestine. Another type of gluten intolerance is called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and this causes the body to mount a stress response, often in the form of GI symptoms, which is different from the immunological response that occurs in those who have celiac disease. So it causes the symptoms, but it won't actually destroy the villi in your intestines. And in a gluten allergy, as with most allergies, the wheat causes the immune system to respond to a food protein because it considers it dangerous to the body when it actually isn't. This immune response is often time-limited and does not cause lasting harm to body tissues. So to conclude, I want to say that whatever the symptoms may be, it's important to speak to a physician if you or somebody you love experiences any signs or symptoms of celiac disease in order to be properly diagnosed and begin treatment to avoid the potential long-term health conditions. And this concludes my presentation on celiac disease. Again, my name is Leslie Kozerski, and thank you for listening.